it's the postseason, it's F5 season, whatever you want to call it, roster mania. The craziness has arrived, and this move is probably the strangest we've seen so far in the postseason. That's Coach NineK from the San Francisco Shock, your 2019 champions, is now moving to the Paris Eternal as a head coach in a very strange twist and turn of events. After winning the Season 2 title, Coach NineK is now going to be the head coach of the Pride and Joy of Europe and France's home team. What does that especially mean? Any players that might be following him? You know, where and who just exactly is Coach NineK? From that, you know that he's won an Overwatch League title, which should put a little bit of hope in the Paris Eternal, right? This is a coach that has decimated and run through a number of Overwatch League brackets. You have their golden stage in stage 2. You've got their fantastic run in the lower bracket of the Overwatch League seasonal playoffs. This is a coach that has a good head on his shoulders, at least from the outset. It's very difficult to judge coaches in a system, but this is going to be his chance to create his own system. So there's at least some hope there. There's at least a positive mark, a gold star on his resume that says, yes, I should be at least taken seriously, right? And that's, again, something that Paris should be looking forward to. He's a former player for the Rox Orcas, coached in NA Contenders with NRG, and then obviously moved to San Francisco and did very, very well there. Now, head coach on Paris, what exactly does that mean? Will he be maybe taking some San Francisco players with him? I think there's a likely possibility that certainly could happen. Now, why is that? I've been convinced and swayed as we go farther into the postseason that teams in general will be paring down their rosters. And why is that? With 2020 brings travel, and with travel, you've got visas and lodging and all kinds of costs that teams have not had to necessarily deal with, at least to the degree that it will be increased in 2020, right? There's going to be a lot more expenditure. Having players that necessarily aren't super vital to the core of your team could be pared away. Is there a chance that there could be a Coach NineK and Striker reunion, you know, a la Rox Orcas? I think that's pretty unlikely, seeing how Paris is a mostly Western roster. With a Korean coach, though, there, you know, opens up some dialogue on if Paris could be moving to a mixed roster format. I think it's pretty unlikely, but we'll get into that one. I think the more obvious one is NineK. He's already a free agent. He's been released earlier. Coach NineK has worked with him. You know, this is a player that has been very active on the bench. Rumors have it that him and Choi have been competing for the starting spot, and, you know, Choi, just being the absolute baller that he is, seems like he has edged NineK out, but this is a player that has gone through a number of different roles. NineK has moved from, I believe at one point he was playing support to playing projectile DPS, now being one of the better flex, just basically flex players, but more predominantly playing tank now. Very, very talented player, very flexible. And I think that was one of the big reasons why San Francisco approached NineK over some other characters. You know, having that flexibility definitely lends itself to the craziness that was the pre-222 era. But with 222 approaching, how important is it going to be super flexible? It probably won't pay off to be super crazy flexible, but what that shows is that you have a wide variety of skill sets that can lend itself to playing other heroes very well. So when you have a hero like Sigma enter the pool, NineK should be able to at least have a good footing to start from. He has a good foundation, being able to play a number of heroes. It at least lends itself to you know, maybe having a leg up there, right? So that's where, you know, the two players from Shock that probably most likely will leave. NineK has already left, and Striker, again, is he necessarily core to the roster? I think there's an argument to say that he isn't, but he's still a fantastic and very, very talented player. But does San Francisco have him in the highest his team? Does, Striker still want to stay there and play? It's difficult to say. Now, with a Korean coach, like I mentioned before, opens up possibilities on what this rebuild could look like. And again, I do believe that this is probably going to be a somewhat rebuild. You've got Fei on Toronto Defiant now. A lot of the support staff, a lot of the coaching staff has already left. Like I mentioned, Fei's on Toronto Defiant. I believe Scientist's looking for a team on, at least on social media. It sounds like it's more of a restricted free agency. And you've got Kai, looking for, it seems like he's a free agent at the moment as well. So at least the front office is completely different. Does that necessarily mean that the playing roster, the starting roster, is going to be completely different? Again, it's speculation at most. It's very difficult to say. They have 4, European players on contracts, at least publicly at the moment. You've got Ben Best, Hip, NineK, and Soon. I think that if we're going to assume that the league as a whole on average is going to be trying to mitigate cost as much as possible, I don't believe that they're just going to pull a Florida Mayhem and just kind of pay off the players and buy them out of their contracts. I think that's a little bit much. I think that if anything, the most likely outcome from this is that Coach NineK has just been, prospected by whatever management Paris has as a revitalization. He'll probably fill out the rest of the coaching staff and help build around these 4 players, possibly on a budget leading into 2021 and maybe a full-on rebuild at that point. But I really find it difficult to believe that we'll be getting anything more than just a fully Western roster from Paris. But with a Korean coach, you do have to, at least we have to acknowledge the fact that they could go for a mixed roster. If Striker does come over, again, speculation on my part, kind of a predictive measure, but if that does happen, what would that look like? Is that possible? Again, it is. You have a Korean head coach. He's going to speak Korean. He's worked with Korean players before, some very, very talented Korean players. It's definitely a possibility, but I don't think it's very likely. Again, you've got 4 players, skill, ignoring their overall skill, but you have 4 Western players already on contracts. Are you just going to let them go? Are you going to build maybe a Korean core around them or with them in mind? It's a possibility, but not one that I think is very likely. And if we're going to go that far, is it a possibility they go full Korean? This would be the weirdest move, to say the least. A team that went into the league as, again, the pride and joy of Europe, playing GOATs. This was supposed to be their meta, and they kind of fell on their face. Definitely did not perform as expected. Do they just abandon all hope and go full Korean? That would be insane. I don't think anybody would be able to predict that. And again, this would be a full mayhem. I'm going to buy you out of your contracts and send you on your merry way and spend a ton of money. And that's not something that I think teams are willing to do going into 2020, spending the visas and all of these extra costs that these teams are going to have to provide. I don't see them going full Korean. That's just outside of the realm of possibility. Could they go mixed? It's a possibility. I don't know where you'd want to look, but there again, there's a lot of Korean players that are free agents at the moment that may or may not be even public. There's a lot of, there's a lot of contenders talent even becoming of age. So there are, there is the talent out there, but is that something that Paris is interested in? It would be very surprising to see that become a reality, to see Paris Eternal be a mixed roster. I think that would be pretty surprising. If anything, I think they take the 4 players that they have so far, Ben Best, Hip, NineK, and Soon, and they probably build a fully Western roster around that core and try and market the heck out of them and maybe do a possible rebuild once their contracts are over in 2021. I don't see them going full, Florida Mayhem and buying them out of their contracts. I think that's just so much money that this organization is going to just burn. But anything is possible. This off season has been quite crazy so far. So that's kind of where my head sits with NineK. I think it's a great move for them entirely, but what does that mean going forward? I think this one is going to have to be a pin in the board. We're gonna have to revisit this at some point, but this is kind of where I'm sitting with Coach NineK and Paris Eternal so far. So if you like the video, please subscribe and check out the other ones. Ring that little bell so you get the rest of my postseason roster mania nonsense videos. And go check out Tactical Crouch podcast Tuesday at 2 p.m. EST. I'd love it if you stopped by and asked some questions and, interacted and gave us a listen. So, yeah, thanks guys for listening, and tune into the podcast on Tuesdays, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.